You live tweeted the whole day throughout the commission. What were your general impressions?
Well, just like we saw last weekend, any of the lawyers that are maybe anti-convoy is a little bit too strong, but we'll call it what it is. The narrative seems to be very similar week to week with what they get when they go up and they actually are asking these witnesses questions. So it's kind of like a poultice is what I'm referring to. Whatever they get from them is usually a part of the same narrative. Not much new information comes into play until we have the convoy organizer lawyers that go up to the stand and they actually cross-examine these witnesses. That is usually when I find I get the most out of my day. And those tweets also get the most optics, impressions.
Yeah. Of course, always great to hear Brendan Miller and Bathsheba
Miller
Vandenberg.
time.
Yeah. Cross-examine the witnesses as well as the GCCF and TGF lawyers as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
Eva, your thoughts from today's testimonies that we've heard?
Well, I just wanted to say that I feel the same way with some of the questions that we've been hearing from other counsel is I do really find, as you were saying, Celine, that when Brendan Miller goes up, he really gets to the heart of why we are all here, whether or not it was justified to enact the Emergencies Act. We really see him zeroing in on that particular issue. And today, I know we were going to talk about this, so I'll just jump right into it, is Brendan Miller put to the mayor from Windsor a document from CSIS.
Yeah.
So if we're going to be talking about the Emergencies Act, if we're going to be talking about whether there was a national security threat, who are we going to be asking the question of? It's CSIS. That's the federal, intelligence department.
Exactly. Yeah.
So he brought that up. And what did it say on February 13th is it said, our recommendation is not to invoke the Emergencies Act because that will actually, in my words, in my summary, cause more harm than good.
Yeah.
He was concerned that it would elicit more extremist views and more violence because people were concerned about the breakdown with the system and the government. So you see that kind of evidence come through and it's nobody else is talking about it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I know that I saw that CTV had edited one of their articles and kind of posted about it afterwards, after the fact, right? But I think being in that room, that was so significant. It kind of comes with the Miller brand, whenever he goes up there, I'm a little bit in shock. I never know what's gonna happen. He just zeroes in, like you said, and then it's like, bam, it's Miller time. Closes his notebook, he says thank you, and then he just goes, and it's fantastic every time. So this was significant, and you're right, not enough people are talking about that yet. It says it point blank, and that's something that's been missing.
Yeah, well, let's take a look at the document itself. If we could show it once again on the screen.
Yeah,
if you could
definitely.
just do a little rundown of the document. So what should we what should we understand from this?
So the significant point that I was referring to, and that Brendan Miller, actually what he did was he read it into the record. So it was the third bullet point there. And there's no way I could read it from here on the screen, but you could see this is CSIS notes and it's dated February 13th. And basically it says similar to what I said is that, and I guess everyone can read it for themselves, but invoking the Emergencies Act can cause more harm with increased violence and increased extremist views.
Yeah.
So, you look at something like that, you're getting that straight from the top and you question immediately why the next day the federal government invoked the Emergencies Act. Who are they listening to?
Yeah, exactly. And tying that into Crowley's testimony afterwards, just to jump ahead a little bit, just to get to this point, he said actually twice, I remember, that he was not sure if it was necessary to invoke it in the end, based on the rest of his testimony. So even with them invoking it, and we saw what happened in Ottawa, we saw what happened in Windsor, Ontario at that blockade, still, Deputy Chief Jason Crowley said that he implied it was not necessary, and he said that multiple times through his testimony. I actually didn't mind listening to his testimony. It was not the worst.
And that's not even the first time that we hear that. So a little while ago, we heard that the OPP officer, I believe it was Marcel Baudin, might be another person who gave a document to the federal government, to federal cabinet, suggesting that they should negotiate with the protester instead of invoking the Emergencies Act.
Yeah.
The cabinet, at that same meeting where they invoked the act, took a look at the document, threw it away and decided to invoke the Emergencies Act anyway. It's not the first time that we hear the police say something to the federal government, and the federal government doing the exact opposite. It's the second time, I believe, at least.
Yeah, well, I unless I completely missed it, but I have not heard one witness thus far say that it was something we needed and it was something that we used the Emergencies Act.
Necessary.
Yes, and what's really important from what we've heard today it was just Windsor, about Windsor 100%. So it was the mayor of Windsor and the chief of police, I think is his role
WPS.
For Windsor. Yeah. And both witnesses, what really stood out and what everyone in Canada needs to be reminded of is the blockades that were there were already gone before the Emergencies Act was invoked. So how could either of these witnesses say that's something we needed, that's something we asked for, when the blockades, the protest was already gone?
Yeah. I want to talk about the part. I'm not sure if we have any clips from that yet from the day, but specifically when they were mentioning, again, jumping ahead a little bit, but this part really stood out to me. It bothered me is all the claims that the protesters were using children, physically using children as body shields. So, I mean, like physically picking up your child and being like, you can't hurt me. And just like having them between the police lines. Crowley towards the end said, he did say this. He said that when asked by Miller, I need to find that clip by Miller. He said, well, it was enough hard evidence for me when I saw children standing in a line and like holding hands. Like that was enough for me to believe the claims and, what the misinformation from the mainstream media and the other police reports. It's just a bunch of hearsay.
Well, but before we continue, because we've been talking for a little while. Let's take a look at that clip so that everyone can see what we're talking about.
Confirmation bias. Strategic analysis must be driven by direct evidence collection and assessment as opposed to reliance on social media posting as it lacks context and where the poster's bias may not be considered. Would you agree with that?
Potentially, yes. But I can say that, like I said, I don't even think I saw this. But when it talks about real evidence, when I heard the protesters themselves on the open chat talking about human shields, children as human shields, and seeing a picture with children holding hands across the intersection here in church and college in the early stages, that's hard evidence for me.
Okay. And of course, you followed up on investigating that and making sure that, that wasn't an issue?
Our special investigations unit was definitely involved, and they deal with the children, the crimes against children, along with CAS for sure.
Okay. And you can agree there that the report there from the 12th from OPP says no persons were observed outside. There was no children were observed, but believed to be inside a camper. If we can scroll down. Only Canadian flags observed. That's it. So you can agree based on that report, as of the 12th, according to the OPP, that wasn't really an issue.
Not at this time, for sure.
And again, you agree possibly with what I said to you with respect to essentially the validity of relying on social media alone, right?
We did not rely on it alone, but I would agree with that. You cannot rely on it alone, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So if I could jump into this right away is let's talk about evidence for a second. So that's something, we've talked a lot about. You mentioned hearsay. And I would love if somebody could put up on the screen what the Facebook post was. Okay, so we can't do that right now, so I'll encourage you just to watch it. So what the question was right before is you would see the document, and this was brought up by the federal government. So they called them tweets. If you actually look at the evidence, it was a Facebook post. So they didn't even get the source correct, which is not great.
Yeah.
And then what it was is just unidentified. And Brendan Miller confirmed that in the cross-examination just before this clip started, is he said, do you know who this person is?
Yeah.
Was this person identified? Were they even in Windsor? Do you have any information to corroborate what is said? And if you look at that post, the words aren't even spelled correctly.
Yeah.
So this is what the federal government was using to put to this, chief of police about human shields. That's the evidence they brought. Unidentified, uncertain who, where, what, when, how. Then you go down 1-2 pages to an OPP intelligence report. And you saw right there, it said no children were observed. So we have the government of Canada using a Facebook post by some unidentified person versus OPP intelligence information. So even going back to our discussion before about credible CSIS information not being used, here we have credible OPP intelligence information not being used. Rather, the government is looking at a Facebook comment.
It's really incredible, isn't it? Like when you break it down, and thank you so much for bringing more context to this, because I think this is such an important part of the testimonies from today. Children, like just the narrative, again, it's very similar to what we're seeing. They continue to paint the narrative as if these protesters are these dangerous, very, very violent people. So to the point that they would use their own children as body shields to deter police from taking action. Again, like you already reiterated, and we saw today, that blockade was disassembled even before the Emergencies Act was evoked. And there were no children that were reported, except for some that were within a camper, safe, warm, and with their families, I would assume. So really incredulous, really. Riveting.
Really hard to watch when you actually look at the evidence that is being used to justify anything. You know, the evidence is not a Facebook comment.
No, goodness, I would hope not. In that case, I've got a lot of evidence for some cases myself. My goodness, check those comment sections, you know?